Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 22 of my modded Factorio playthrough. In this episode, we are going to talk about and plan all of the things necessary to grow our own trees. Enjoy. I think the next thing we can do is automate wood production. Now, it's not critical, being as we have almost 10,000 wood, but the thing is that wood has a couple of different uses. Like we can turn it into fuel through wood processing. Or we can process these wood pellets into carbon dioxide as well. Although that is by wood processing 2, which we won't have access to yet, but that's a way to save coal, so that's something to keep in mind. And we can make carbon from it as well, so there's a lot of uses for it, and you want to be careful with your wood if you have a limited quantity of it, especially if your mat generation doesn't have very many trees on it. But in this situation, if we're growing trees, then we can just use it however we see fit. And an advantage to a lot of these farm type places is they consume pollution. So you can see negative 75 pollution, negative 100 pollution, and these farms, negative 40 pollution. So there's a big advantage to that. Now, there's kind of a long chain of stuff to research to get this, but it's all red science, so we might as well do it. So let's look up here. We need garden processing, which allows us to build the seed extractor, which is basically how we get seeds from those gardens that we find. It's how you get your initial crop, basically. So you need that seed extractor. We have a few gardens already in our inventory. Where'd I leave the car? All the way up here. Wow, it's so empty now. Look at all that space. So we have some swamp trees and a swamp garden. Let's see, while we're doing all this research, since it's going to take a little bit of time, we can just go running around collecting all of these gardens and trees and whatnot. Oh, there's one. Another swamp tree. Okay. And we also need to learn washing. Basically, we need washing to get the mud necessary to grow the trees. And there's kind of a lot that goes into it, but it's simpler than it looks. So there's a pump that provides water, basically where the standard pump takes water from the top of the lake, so it's mostly water. Well, this takes water from the bottom of the lake, so it's mostly mud. And then it goes through washing plants. And the way it works is you add water to the mud water to thin it out and process it. See how we have viscous mud water, and water will give us some amount of mud and heavy mud water. Then we can process the heavy mud water into concentrated mud water, concentrated into light, light into thin. And then if we really want to, we could turn the thin into saline water, and it will have gone through its whole process back down to salt water, and we've gotten mud out of it. And if we want to, we can take that mud and turn it back into mud water if we want to not have any mud left over. But mud is the product we want, so we won't be doing that. And then from this various mud water, you can make a couple different things. So from the concentrated mud water, you can siphon it off from the chain to make clay. You can siphon light mud water to make limestone. And you can siphon the thin mud water to get sand. Now it turns out it's wash sand, or you could take normal sand and turn it into wash sand if you want to do it that way. And also opens up sand sleuthing, however you say that, which is an interesting device here where it will produce a couple of random ores by washing sand. And what's interesting about that is that since we can turn quartz into sand, and then we could wash it to make wash sand, we could actually turn that quartz into all of this random stuff. It's kind of useful, but also kind of not. Like, yes, we would get 20% of its volume in iron and 10% of its volume in copper. But then we'd get these other things that we don't really need. So it would be turning one byproduct into others. So that doesn't sound like a very smart thing to do. But that is a way to kind of randomly but consistently produce some of these rarer items if you want them. So we need this whole process for the mud. So let's research that and continue walking and find the rest of these things. Another thing you could do if you're having trouble finding where stuff is, now it's obvious that it's right there, but you can use your deconstruction tool, and when you pass over it, you can see the unique resources, which tells you you've passed over it. And then, like, if it's inside a giant forest, you can use that to determine kind of its location. Okay. We also need greenhouses. So the initial type of greenhouse works without those rare trees. It's very slow, but it is the first tier of making trees. So basically you put wood in and you get some seedlings, and you can grow those seedlings into trees. But then if you want the wood, you have to hand craft it, break the branches apart to turn it into wood. So that part won't be automated. So that's the first way of doing it. You don't want to do it that way, but we need that research to keep going. So let's research it and walk a tiny bit of time. And then the research will be done before we get to the next tree. And next we need to do sulfur processing, which just takes that sulfur dioxide gas, which we have as a byproduct of lead, and we can turn it into sulfuric acid with purified water, which we get by purifying regular water into purified water. This is a component of fertilizer, which is something we can use with it. We don't need it for trees technically, but it's something we need to research to get there, so research we will. Oh, and there's the puffer nest. Okay. So there's a couple of things below us here. Like, let's say it's nighttime, we can't see where it is. Well, you can hover this over, and you can see how it kind of is somewhere around here, so we can get rid of it and see if we can find out where it is. So it's probably like right about here. Yeah. And it's completely covered by trees and whatever. There it is. I knew it was in there somewhere. We got it. So we got another swamp garden. Okay, there's one right there. And now let's do phosphorus processing. And this is interesting, where it's a sorting method that uses that crushed stone that we're producing. And it will produce slag and a small amount of phosphorus ore. The phosphorus ore can then be combined with washed sand, which we can either make through mud water, or we can clean through silicon and add some carbon in there. And then we will create white phosphorus and carbon monoxide, which we need for the nickel as a byproduct. So that would reduce the need of making carbon monoxide for nickel anyway. So there's some more interconnectedness of the factory. And then we add that phosphorus ore to sulfuric acid, and then we get a byproduct of calcium sulfate and phosphoric acid, which is kind of the whole point of that chain. So now we have a dump for the sulfur, and we have somewhere we can put it into phosphoric acid, because then we can make fertilizer, which we have to add ammonia gas, which comes from another process, which we can finish researching when we get to that point. But anyway, this is necessary to keep going down the chain of trees, so we'll grab it. It seems like a lot right now, but don't worry, it'll make more sense when we actually pursue it. There's the buffer nest. And phosphorus is done. Okay. Now we need wood processing, which I'm not exactly sure why it's a part of requirement of making trees, but anyway, we can make wood pellets from cellulose fiber. And cellulose fiber is made from trees. And it is similar to making coke and carbon. It improves the fuel value of wood. So if you're going to burn a wood or a wood product for fuel, you should process it as far up the chain as you can to get the most fuel out of it. So in this situation, it would be wood pellets, which has 8 megajoules in it, which is quite a bit. It's a very dense fuel. So we do need to research that. It doesn't do us much good right now, but we kind of need to... It is a little annoying how the trees are buried behind all that stuff, specifically considering we don't actually need all that stuff just for making trees. But we will use all these technologies in the factory. We just, not all at once. We need to research it all at once, but it won't be used all at once. And here we go, a temperate tree. It's a little harder to see than the swamp tree. And now we need farming. So farming opens up the farm, and also another important reason for checking each research, besides keeping up to date with the research that you have and not being overwhelmed by all these new technologies you forgot you had, is to make sure that you can actually build them. That it doesn't require a piece of resource that you don't have access to yet. So you don't get all excited, do all this research, and find out, oops, can't make it. So it's good to be checking each one of these. But this opens up a farm, a composter, and a bioprocessor. The farm is the building that we use to basically grow all the things that we need. Makes sense. The composter will take any biological product and compost it into compost, which is necessary ingredient in growing things. And then the bioprocessor, we will turn the grown products into something more useful. In our situation, we would use it for making resin from wood. But let's see, it unlocks soil, which is kind of the whole point of going down this chain, is because we need soil to grow things, which requires compost and mud. Now, mud we make from processing the mud water, and compost we'll have to compost anything biological. The quick and dirty way is to just compost trees. So you grow trees, you compost trees to make more trees, but then that means we will have less trees as an output. Another thing we can do is grow other things we don't actually need, compost them to maximize the productivity of the trees, which is what we will do. And then it also gives us the ability to grow gardens. And I guess this would be useful if you weren't able to actually find any of these gardens in the environment. So you can create them from nothing. And you kind of do need to create them to do some research, which I'll show later. But the desert garden requires wash sand, fertilizer, and saline water, and you can see it requires a ton of each, and also 1,000 seconds crafting time. It takes a very long time to make any of those things. Swamp garden is soil, fertilizer, and viscous. Mud water, temperate, is compost, fertilizer, and just water. So the thing we're probably going to be doing is a lot of the desert stuff, because we're going to have a lot of saline water as a byproduct. Saline water is kind of a junk byproduct. It's very easy to recreate if you need it. I mean, it's literally salt water, so it's easy enough to find, but I like to have my factories be as closed loop as possible. So if we're going to have an excess of saline water, I'd like to try to dump it into something so we don't have to just empty it through a clarifier or something like that. So growing any of the desert plants will require saline water to do that, and that's somewhere to put it. So will it be a closed loop? Will we still have to throw some saline water away? I don't know. Hellmod will tell. But for now, let's get that farming research done. Okay, finally. Down to making trees. So the gimmick of how this works is we have a seed generator, which is kind of weird, but you see how it requires that tree to make the building. The tree isn't a product that we process. It actually goes into building the building itself. And we could have one for each tree. So we're limited on the amount of seed we can generate based on the number of these trees that we find in the environment, until we can grow them later. But the recipe is we put soil and a tree seed in there, water, and give it time, and it grows into a tree. The tree seed is made from soil and then a seedling, and the seedlings, as researched earlier, comes from trees. It just requires less of them than it did before. And this recipe for the tree seeds must be done in those seed generators. And then the arboretum is the building that actually grows the trees. And then we have a new recipe for making wood, which now we could use saw blades and do it in an assembly machine rather than having to do it by hand, which of course is very good. And these saw blades are made from iron plates, but you see how there's a 90% chance of getting a saw blade back after we process it. So basically what it means is each saw blade on average can do about 10 processes before it needs to be replaced. So it really doesn't require that much iron. It requires some to make wood, but not that much. And finally, the ability to make resin is unlocked here. This might be another reason why you would find yourself going down this chain, is even if you don't need to make trees, you still need resin to make early rubber, so you would still have to research all of that stuff. So you might as well start producing trees now, since this resin recipe is locked all the way in here. Where is this thing? See, this deconstruction planner really helps. Okay, it's like right in here. There it is. Covered up. But there it is. Okay, we're back to the base. So what do we end up finding? We got some puffer eggs. That. Whatever those are. 3 swamp gardens, 8 swamp trees, and a temperate tree. So we should actually have a pretty good ability to produce trees right now. Now that that's finally researched, we can try Hell Mod and see what we can figure out here. We can kind of clean this menu up a bit, because we need to start a new chain that's probably going to be a little complicated like this. But in the end, we want to make wood. We have our 2 recipes, however the one we want is the automated one. So there we go. Let's just say 1 unit for now and just see what the ratio ends up being later. So we need to make some trees. We have to make sure we pick the right one, because there's lots of stuff here. It's the regular tree that is grown in the arboretum, which requires the soil, but then the tree seed. So let's look at the tree seed, which also requires soil, so that's kind of a reason to do it in this order, because both of these require soil, so we want to get them both on the list first before we do soil, so Hellmod knows the total amount of soil we're going to need. And then a seedling, and there's only 1 recipe for it. It comes out of a seed extractor made from wood. The reason why this output is red is because we're consuming some of the output in order to make output. So it still says 1 because the amount we're consuming is very small. It's probably less than 0.1. So it says product 1 consuming 0.1. I wonder if the matrix solver would finish this. Kind of, it tried. Something to keep in mind is that you're not quite producing this output because you're consuming some of it to go in there. And if we were making compost from wood, it would be less than that. So that's kind of the chain there. And just to make things a little easier, and instead of having them go 1 giant line down the list here, since this starts as wood and ends at wood. Actually, I wonder if we remove this, come out here and start it as a separate thing, if it will look correct. Well, it's certainly blue this time. It's interesting. It kind of shows the way that Hellmod calculates things is a little odd. Green and blue is better than red, so I will leave it there. Just so it looks clean. Although it's still saying just the 1. So it doesn't really seem to make much difference. I wonder if we made this number much larger, like 10, if it would be make more sense. Yeah, there we go. So we turn that number into a 10, and now it's showing we're going to get 9.9 because we're consuming something, and obviously there's rounding errors going in here, but you can tell, though, that the amount of wood going into these seeds is very small compared to our output. I'll just leave it as 10 for now. We'll probably change all that. Okay, and leave it like this. So now we need some soil, which comes from mud and compost. I don't know. I think this is a situation, yeah, where there's a couple of recipes that, for whatever reason... Let's see if it comes up here. Oh, there we go. Where's the composting recipe? Yeah, there's a couple of recipes that, for whatever reason, they don't show up on the standard list. So you have to make sure you're searching the right things. So here's all of the different sources of compost. So you can see here that if we wanted to make it with wood, we would consume 1 wood for every 1 compost. So in doing so, if we used wood to supply compost, we lost 28% of our output just by using wood, which is not great. However, we have all of these other things we can grow as well. Which one can we do? Well, let's look at farming. I believe we're going to need to research... Yeah, we're going to have to go into desert farming. And the desert farming requires sand and saline water to do. So it's going to require a biome planner, which is a special type of research meant just for farming. So we'll have to get into that later. But one thing we can do is figure out, is there any difference on the things we can grow? Because you see we have 3 different things we can grow. Binifran, that, and that. And they each have their own output. So one of those is probably better than the other as far as output to use. I don't know which one would be ideal. It looks like each one of them, 2 go in and a compost comes out. So as far as the quantities, they're all basically the same. So whatever one grows the most of the thing that we want is probably, like, the biggest number is going to be the most efficient. So Binifran, we get 30 every 35. 35 every 30, and 35 every 30. So either of these would probably be fine. So let's just do that to get an idea. We'll just throw it in there to remind us that we need to figure it out later. And let's go back out here, just trying to keep this separated to make it easier to understand. But now we need mud. So out of all of the recipes, let's pick the one that's at the very end of the chain, the one that just makes the saline water. So we can click that, and it's linked. Now it says we need a bunch because it's not taking into account all the previous parts of the chain. So if we make that and click on it, you can see how it's blank, because it's like, no, I'm already making all the things you need. You don't need any of that. But now we have to do the matrix solver, which tells us exactly how many of each building we need. So now we need 6 and 6. But let's see if we make the light mud water. You can see how we basically need 12 of these buildings. But now that we're going down the chain, it's spreading it out. And then the heavy mud water. And this is made from the viscous mud water. And that we could make from mud if we wanted to, but we don't because mud is the thing we want to keep. However, we can put that in there. And for whatever reason, the default item is wrong, so we have to go in here and click seafloor pump. And that tells us the full chain of going down there. Now, I believe what all these numbers are saying, like over here where it says 20%, 25, 33, 50, I believe what that's saying is it's doing 20% of the size of the recipe that it would have wanted to do. Just based on if we were only doing saline water processing to get that mud. And then it's telling us how many buildings we need, so this is being adjusted in real time. So if this was 100%, like this, we need 12 of these, and then nothing of everything else, at least according to the way it's calculating. We would still need them. And how many buildings? Exactly 12. So if we use the matrix solver, it's reducing the number of buildings we need to 2.4. And you see it's a straight line. Boom, 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 which will give us the saline water and the necessary amounts of mud. So this is looking pretty good. Just want to see if any of this needs to be sorted any differently. Probably not. Let's make those saw blades. We need very few of them. And there we go. We have a chain. It starts from the seafloor pump, and we have 3 sets of each building processing water, giving us, in the end, mud and some saline water. We will use that saline water for some other things, but if we can't find a use for it, we'll just throw it away because it is of low value. And then we make soil from that mud and compost. The source of the compost of which will be something else, not trees. We could make it out of trees initially to start the process, but ultimately we're going to grow some plants to make the compost to improve the output of the trees. And then we'll need to make some seedlings from wood. And then finally we combine those seedlings and soil into tree seeds, and then we grow them with more soil into trees, and then those trees will be chopped up into the wood we need. That's it for this episode. In the next one, we are going to start growing all of those trees. Thanks for watching.